Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. Today's video is going to be dealing with the questions that flew past me so quickly yesterday in the live broadcast that I missed them. So they didn't get dealt with there and then. So I'll deal with them separately now. They're not forgotten. A really big thank you, because that was an impromptu live broadcast, and normally a live broadcast, you advertise it quite a bit in advance to make sure people know it's coming, which I didn't. As I say, it was impromptu. I didn't think too much about it. I just thought we'll have a go at this, and it turned into a much bigger event than I ever could have hoped for, quite honestly. There was an awful lot of people joined in despite the short notice, and I enjoyed it. It was a bit of fun. It did get sidetracked occasionally. We had a chat about some music, and wandered off into various directions, and I got asked about some plants, some of which I could get at and deal with there and then. But yeah, I enjoyed it. And obviously something totally different for a Sunday morning chat, because it's interactive. And I did enjoy that. Some people ask, do I get nervous? No, I'm not that sort of person. I don't do that. What's the worst that can happen? Drop the camera on the floor, won't pick it up again. So yeah, I enjoyed it. Whether it will be every Sunday, I don't know. And if it is going to be regular on a Sunday, it's probably not going to get allowed to go on for a whole hour. The main reason is it generates an awful lot of work for me. You'd be surprised, because to go through it and get the questions I've missed, I've had to watch it. So there's an hour gone straight away. Yeah, so, I'll think about it. But I will. I was happy enough with the quality of the camera. Not perfect, and certainly not as good as this one. And some of the colours were coming out a bit odd. But, it's a webcam. It's not designed to be perfect as such. You've got to pay a lot of money for one of those, and I didn't. It's a middle range one, shall we say. But yeah, I will repeat the exercise, and next time you'll get plenty of warning. So what I've done is I've written down all the questions that I missed and the channel name that posted the question. Now, some of these people I actually know their personal name, but that doesn't seem very fair on the ones I don't. So I'm just going to stick to the channel names. That makes it even across the board. So I wrote them all down in my bestest scribble. It's actually not my best scribble at all. And we'll start at the top. Right, Erika Patterson said, spikes on cyclopses, where do they actually come from? They start from right at the base of the pseudobulb. So on those particular types of plants, you tend to get a pseudobulb which has one and occasionally two leaves sticking out the top, and the spike comes out from near the base. So, sort of at the base of the plant near where it touches the media, that's where they come out from. And if you ever see a spike on a cyclopsis, make sure it's got a clear run, and make sure you don't get water on it until it grows. I have had one rot off before now, because it was actually touching the media. So the part of the pseudobulb it came out of was actually in the media, and it rotted off. And they're rare. They don't exactly chuck spikes out like they're going out of fashion. So if you get one, it's precious. Look after it. If necessary, gently tease away the media so that it's got a clear run, and then once it gets a few inches high, it's probably safe. So that's that one. Dinah Hughes asked, how's the Soto Achillea doing? That's probably because I picked it up and just promptly dunked it on the floor because I needed to get at something. It's actually doing very well. I'm pleased that it was repotted in full bloom, basically. I did take quite a few of the spikes off at that time. They were the ones that were starting to fade. But for example, this spike was in bud at the time. Well, that's opened up nicely, as is this one at the back. So I didn't lose any buds or blooms as a consequence of repotting. There's no new growths on this plant at the moment. What it's done is, however it was grown, which was probably rather well, looking at the size and vigour of the plant, in a burst of growth. So all the new growths got to blooming size at roughly the same time and pushed their spikes out. That's the state it's in now. It's probably not going to produce any more new growths until it's finished blooming. and then, you know, a few weeks to a month later the new growths will start to show. And at that point I'll have to stop and think about, is there room in the pot for them to actually grow? But there should be. I left enough space around the outside. Some of those new growths will probably come up in the middle of the plant anyway. But it's doing well. Fragrance is still there, still nice, and very pleased. I've been after one of these for quite a while, and as soon as I saw this particular plant at the price it was going for, which wasn't a lot of money, I grabbed it quickly there and then. I thought, well, I don't see these come up very often. Strangely enough, after I'd got this one, they started turning up at all the shows. So obviously one of the mass producers had flooded the market for a while. But when they're gone, I doubt if they'll do it again. So, you know, once that lot have been bought and squirreled away into individual collections, they probably won't turn up again for a while. But yeah, this one's doing good. So that's that one. Right, I'm crossing these off as they go because I'm not going to do them in the order they're in, because some of the questions involve quite a few plants, if you see what I mean. It's like a collective, so they'll take a bit longer. But I can move on to this one. My Dendrobium Harvey Ann, how is it doing? Well, the answer is not very well. It was unpotted on the grounds that it was rotting at the base. It now lives in here. It gets some water every now and again, and what it's currently doing is producing several kikis. If you look inside the glass, there's one with roots. A bit higher up there's another nubbin pushing out. There's another one up here near the top of that cane that's producing some roots. So there's some life in it, but there is no sign of life at the base of the plant. What went wrong with this, I haven't got a clue. But prior to the mother plant going down, I did take a couple of kikis off, and they're in amongst the small plants that live under a light. And it's actually, can I get it out? Probably, yes. So in here we had two kikis, both of which produced a new growth, which has grown on a bit. Yeah, so there's in fact two plants in there. It's stopped growing now. It's winter time, and I'm hoping that's going to grow on well next year to replace the mother plant, because I don't think the mother plant's going to recover. So that's Dendrobium Harvey Ann. Why am I messing about with this? That's the answer. The blooms are just too good to lose, and if I don't get a decent plant, I'll buy another one. I need that in my life. Those blooms are just gorgeous. Oh, I forgot to say, that was Amelia asked that question, so that one's done. Right, the next question is about the Dendrobium that's nicknamed the Big Bush, because basically it's a big bush. I'm practically standing in the Vander bucket to get this in. How is this doing? Well, it's a relatively new plant. This was hand-picked for me. And the question comes from Epidendrum Orchids, which I believe is the, I've got a lousy memory, I do apologise, the actual person who hand-picked it and sent it to me. That's probably why they asked. But yeah, it's grown well. It pushed up these three new canes that are strapped together, mainly because it has a habit of flopping, and I needed these upright before they start to branch. So they've grown on quite nicely. That's this year's growth basically, so we're looking at three 2-foot canes there. The rest of it, it's basically a case of what was already there has extended quite a bit. So quite a few of these canes have grown on quite a bit this year. And again at the top, some of them have extended, and some of them are now starting to branch. And this is a strange growth habit for an orchid. It branches naturally. So you get older canes that are, you know, that one got trimmed because it was so tatty, but they push out branches, and then the branches push out branches. So it ends up like a bush. And they can get quite a bit bigger than this. This isn't as big as they can get. It's plenty big enough for me. We did get some blooms earlier in the year. Very attractive, lovely waxy yellow blooms, and quite long lasting and fragrant. So that's why I chose it. But yeah, it's growing on quite nicely. It's quite a few branches, and there's quite a few places on this where it should bloom again come the spring. So, you know, it tends to bloom sort of in places like this, yeah, rather than places that have got leaves on. So obviously the canes have to become old enough to have become deciduous and started to branch, but it'll bloom on the branches as well as the main stems. So yeah, we should get some more blooms in the spring. It takes up a lot of space, but it lives on the floor. It's got its own little space down there, and it seems to be growing well where it lives. It's the plant that gets moved the most, because when I'm watering I need somewhere to put my pots to let them drain, and that's one of my main places to let that happen. So the first thing I do when I start watering is pick that up and take it in the house, and then when I've finished it comes back out again. So it gets moved around a lot, but it seems to be doing okay. I'm quite pleased with the growth on it. There's quite a bit of root activity in the pot as well, so yeah, coming on nicely, that one. Well pleased. Right, next question is from Luisa Estrada, and does Dendrobium Farmer I need a rest? Well, I haven't got Farmer I the species, but I've got two primary crosses which include Dendrobium Farmer I. They also include Griffithianum. It's not the best looking plant. It's got an infection on the leaves. That's long since stopped, and the new growths are coming out okay. Now this is a warm grower, Farmer I. What Griffithianum is, I'm not talking about at the moment, but it does have an effect on my plants, because it grows differently. Farmer I is a warm grower. It shouldn't get cold. And as far as a winter rest is concerned, it is said in some places that yes, it needs a rest, and in other places it says it will bloom better if it gets a short winter rest. So if it's going to be kept warm, which is what's recommended, I would say that it shouldn't be totally dry for any length of time. So yes, reduce the feed down and stop feeding. Unless you've got strong new growths coming out, you've got to look at the plant. If the plant's in active growth, then it's going to need some food. The time of year becomes irrelevant. And the fact that it's a warm grower, it's not used to a cooler winter, so it would naturally continue growing providing it had enough hydration. So the short rest that's recommended, I would say, is to do with the fact that it only gets a short period where the rains stop. And because it grows in places that stay warm most of the year round, you know, that's probably going to be evergreen tropical type forests. So, you know, if the rain stopped for a huge amount of time in a tropical rainforest, it wouldn't be a tropical rainforest anymore. Anyway, a short rest, and don't let it get cold as far as Farmer I is concerned. And as far as my plants are concerned, they've got Griffithianum in there, and that's not a warm grower, and that does need a bit of a rest. So it confuses the hell out of it when you've got two conflicting parents in a primary cross. But I reduce my watering for practically all of my plants during the winter because they're not growing as well because of the low temperatures I've got. So it does get a sort of rest, but I don't withhold water for huge amounts of time. This one's just maturing a cane over here, so yeah, it's only just finished maturing that. So okay, that's that one. Right, the next question is from Beatrix, whose actual channel name is Big Box Orchid. How appropriate. Never really tied those two together before. Anyway, she asked how my Neo that was potted up in the Japanese style was actually doing. Well, it's difficult to tell because it hasn't been done that long, and I'll put a link to the video where I actually potted this up because I think Beatrix missed it and hasn't been able to find it. But its only real new thing going on is it has got a new fan coming out there. Apart from that, it's okay. Now these should get pretty dry through the winter, and they don't mind the lower temperatures either. This makes life difficult potting it like this, because it's difficult to only give it a little bit of water, because the moss holds so much and stays wet for some considerable time. So this is going to have to be watered with great care through the winter, or the roots stand a chance of possibly having a bit of rot. But in theory, this has got so much air inside it. There's a little tiny mesh pot in there, like that. Yeah? So that's not a solid mound of moss. It's just a ring of moss around the outside. And inside it's hollow. And in the bottom of the pot are some stones, which don't hold any water, obviously. So I'm giving it the best chance. And I think it is actually producing some new growth at the top. It's difficult to tell. It's one of those things you'd have to set it up and take an actual photograph, and then like take a photograph, I don't know, 5 or 6 weeks later and compare the two. So I don't, you know, this doesn't get watered that often, so I don't look at it very often, so it's difficult to notice the changes. But it's doing okay, you know, and quite honestly it looks a lot better like that than it did before. So yeah. I'm not going to try and pronounce the name. I'll have put a pop-up, the actual clonal name, because it's a Japanese word and I don't speak Japanese. Right, the next question from Cheryl Adams is about a plant that is right up the back of this shelf, and I'm not clearing the whole shelf off to get at it specifically. I'm just hoping I can get the camera in there. And it's my Epidendrum, the reed stem type, that has the lovely orange blooms. And the question is, are there any spikes yet? And you can see the new canes are at the top of the plant with leaves on them. The old canes have got an abrupt chop where the flower spike came off, so you can see the difference. So I have got a lot of new canes coming. I don't think I've got any spikes coming yet, but now that I've just said that, I'll see if I can line my finger up and watch the camera screen. Where are we? That one looks like it might be a spike. Could be. But in theory, these canes should carry on extending through the winter and the spikes should start to form in early spring. They take a while to grow and form the buds and then the buds to open. But it's naturally a sort of spring through summer bloomer. And yeah, literally it stays in bloom that long. So it's growing well, lots of new canes, growing on, gaining in height, and possibly one spike just starting. The others will follow on, those canes will all bloom. It's doing well. Right, I've got 2 questions from Marilyn Davis, so I'll do those both together. And one of the questions is just, it doesn't have a definitive answer. The question is based on, is there any specific aftercare once Cattleya types have finished blooming? Well, yes and no. If you go into the species, or possibly primary crosses, then yes, there could be. Because the book on Cattleyas I read while I was at Rachel's does define that some Cattleyas do actually need to go virtually dormant after they finish blooming, but it's at species by species level. And that dormancy can be anything from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, and if some of those plants don't get that just stopped growing type period, then the next set of growths won't be as strong and they may not bloom. So it could be important, but it's at individual plant level, so you can't have like a definitive answer. I mean, I would say for the more complex hybrids and things like that, probably not. Just look at the plant. If the plant's got new growths or is pushing out new roots or both, then it's growing. And if it's growing, it needs some feed and some water. And that's probably the best thing I can say about that, is look at the plant. Is it growing? And if it's just finished blooming and there's no sign of other life on it, in other words, there's no new canes starting, roots have sort of effectively stopped growing, then it might need a little bit of a rest. But I wouldn't go too mad unless you know exactly what you're doing at individual species level. That's about the best answer I can give on that. And the other question is, are zygopetalums deciduous? And that's a yes and no answer. And the real answer is probably eventually. They don't normally keep their leaves forever. They're a little like Oncidium types. They will keep their leaves for quite a few years. And obviously all the time they're pushing up new growths, possibly blooming if you're lucky. I've got one spike coming on here. Oh, that's pushed on nicely. Yes, so, you know, the plant should be getting bigger, but as is the nature, like with the Oncidium types, eventually the bulbs do drop their leaves. And it's probably going to vary from zygo to zygo. I mean, if you look on mine, there are some bulbs with no leaves on. I can't remember whether they were like that when I've got it. But there's also some older bulbs that have still got their leaves. But obviously a new cane, if it's going to bloom, it normally pushes up the spike before the canes mature, or the bulbs mature. As you can see with this one, it's not even swelling at the base yet and the spike's pushing up. That's their normal pattern. And then it'll bloom and the bulb will swell and another new growth will come out, and next time it'll be out the side of the pot. It's almost out the side of the pot now. But the idea with these is to keep them growing. So when there are new growths, make sure they get fed and watered well, push those growths on, hopefully get some blooms. And you can have a plant, once a plant gets quite large, you can have new growths at all stages, just starting, you know, half mature with a spike and totally mature with a full set of expanded leaves. So under normal circumstances I wouldn't call it a deciduous plant, but it will drop older leaves eventually after a number of years. Right, it's a question on a plant I have had but no longer have. Maxillaria tenuifolia, the coconut orchid. It's a climber. The pseudobulbs tend to just come out higher and higher and higher. So they're being produced quite a long way from the pot, the media. Yeah, it's one that would probably do quite well on a mounted, but it is a bit of a drinker, and therein lies the problem. How do you stop the pseudobulb shriveling? Well, when you look at one of those extended, I'll call it a cane for lack of rhizome I suppose, and you've got a bulb near the base, yeah, and then it goes up a bit and there's another bulb, and then it goes up a bit and there's another bulb. Each one of those bulbs has one or more roots, and they go down right through the sheath and should eventually get to the pot. So when I owned that, it was the only plant where I watered the whole plant and gave it a really good soaking so that all of those rhizomes and their sheaths were soaking wet, because inside of there is roots that you can't see, but they are there. And if it's growing well, those roots do get right down and eventually into the media at the base of the plant. But obviously good humidity will help, but that certainly is the only plant that I ever used to soak the whole plant, and mine did okay and the bulbs didn't shrivel. It just wasn't my favourite plant, and the version of it that I had did not have the coconut fragrance. And I thought, well, it's not a good enough thing to own if it's not going to do the fragrance thing. So I think Danny had a huge chunk of it, and I think the rest of it got given away. But yeah, I've had it once, but it's no longer in the collection. Whoops, I keep forgetting to say who asked the question. That was Chris de la Cruz asked that one. And I think actually during the event somebody actually answered it anyway. But that's my answer. Right, next question was from Mandy4009, that's the channel name, and it was about the drip trays. Obviously my temperatures drop down quite cool in the winter, and when I water my pots, I do water them, and an awful lot of water comes out the bottom, so they drip. Well, I put them to one side to drain. When they've finished dripping, I put them on their drip tray and put them back where they came from, because they will often continue to drip, and I've got no control over where those drips would go. So they could get down, you know, on a new growth. They could drip into the, you know, leaf joints of bulbs extending, or even into the crown of some plants. And in the low temperatures, that's not a good idea. So the drip trays are there to do what they say on the tin, to stop the plants dripping on each other. Now obviously when I water my mounts, that's quite a bit of a faff, because I have to hang them in places where they don't drip on anything but the floor, and wait till they've totally finished dripping before I can hang them back up again. But I like to keep my plants dry. I water the roots and the base of the plant. I don't water the plant. So you'll very, very rarely see me out with a sprayer getting my plants wet. I keep the plant dry and I keep the air humidity high. So that's how I work. And I don't get much problem with leaf spotting or anything like that because the leaves are dry. It helps stop any of those little bacterial infections that can cause the black spots on your leaves. If the leaves are dry, you're not creating an environment where that can happen very easily. It can still happen, but it shouldn't be anywhere near as bad. So that's that one. Right, next question from Zoltan Merry, I think it is a general question, and it's based on how do I keep so many different types of orchids in one single environment? And it is a question that crops up. You know, I say, like, you know, I've got, these are where I keep the cool growers, you know, these are my Cattleyas, these are my Vandas. So there is a large variety of different genera in here, and within the genera there are even different care requirements for different plants. Yeah, so you have to think of the whole environment as one, but in amongst it are what I call microclimates. And for instance, over here, these plants here do not get much sun coming in through the shade netting. So these are shaded quite heavily. They're also shaded by large plants sitting above them. So in the summer when the sun's high, it never gets through to these down here. These are in the deepest shade I've got. I know it doesn't look like it now because the sun's got about an hour coming through that shade netting before it goes behind a tree, basically. So these are my lower light ones. So to adjust light levels, especially easy if you've got a single direction light coming in from windows, you know, if you want a more shaded plant, move it back from the glass or stand it behind another plant so that the other plant shades it, and put your bright light ones in a place where they get the most light, like up there near the roof and up on the high shelves. So my highlight areas are my top shelves, Cattleyas. Now this is a ripe mix bunch here. They're there for a reason. For the first year I've got lights. And this is a collection of plants, a variety, to see how well they respond to being under a light and having their day length extended. Now, they wouldn't all normally live there. But they're all, this time of year, capable of taking the sun direct in through that window very, very late in the afternoon. It's not going to do them any harm this time of year. So I've got a way of adjusting light levels by using some plants to shade others, and those that I don't want much shade get up near the glass. And then you've got heat rises, yeah? So the coolest parts in here are down near the floor. The heat rises away from it. And the warmest places are up near the roof. So these are what I call little microclimates. And you can even create microclimates by what the plant's actually potted in. If a plant likes to stay constantly moist all the time, well then use a mix in the pot that dries out really slowly. Yeah? And if it's a plant that needs a fast wet dry cycle, like say a Cattleya, you know, then get it in a pot with something that's going to dry really fast. Well, clay pots aid that by taking some moisture out of the media and evaporating it quickly, and these are all in large chunky bark. So it dries quickly. In the summer they dry in less than 2 days. This time of year quite a bit longer. My Tolumnias need a really fast wet dry cycle, so they're all mounted, and that's a silhouette, I can tell. So even in one growing environment there are differences in both temperature and even airflow. These plants over here need good airflow and a cool airflow. So I've got these little computer fans that are constantly on. They're on 24/7 and they're just for this area. These haven't got that, they don't need it. Yeah? So that's a cooling effect both by, you know, normal big circulating fans in the summer, but even in the winter. You can see the leaves are moving. These little fans do a great job at keeping that area cool and buoyant. No stale damp air in there, not for those plants. So that's microclimates. You just need to think about what's going on where your plants are. You'll have some, you know, there will be more shady areas. You know, there'd be brighter areas that you might have to move some plants into a cooler room if you need lower temperatures, and then perhaps bring them back into a slightly warmer room when the winter comes, because it will be too cold for them. So individual plants, think about what they need and then cluster them together in sets so that they can all get roughly the same care. That's how I work it. Right, the next one was from Bumblebee, and sorry I didn't say hi yesterday, but those comments were flying past at such a rate of knots I couldn't keep up with individuals saying hi, if you see what I mean. So I'll say hi now. I hope you're doing well. The question is, how are my phals doing? Well, the easy answer looking round there is not that well. They're not my favourite orchids. They don't get a lot of care and attention, I must admit. My Sweet Memory has only just finished blooming. The spike itself extended. It looks like it might do it again, and then it branched and those bloomed and they look like they might extend. I don't know, but this has had some issues during the heat. It's difficult to say, but it's got markings on the leaves that are not natural. These are naturally a pale coloured Phalaenopsis rather than the nice deep green. They have that natural yellowing look. I mean, it's got some roots. It's not like it's a rootless plant or anything, but it hasn't grown a new leaf recently, and the last one it grew back in the heat wave and it didn't get to full size. So I wouldn't say it's doing brilliantly, but it's not dead yet. My Sedera japonica, which is now Phalaenopsis japonica, is in a sorry state. I'm a bit dubious about whether I should keep this. Looking at the way that looks a bit virus to me. It doesn't look a happy plant. Last leaf it grew wasn't full size. That leaf looks real dodgy. I'm just waiting. See, that leaf there has got the same markings on it. I think that plant is highly suspect. I think it might have to go. It did bloom a while back. Had some blooms on it, but I really do think that needs coming out of the collection. That's that one. The other four are mounted. This little plant just seems to tick over nicely. Its oldest spike started to die back and then branched and produced a new bloom. That's only just opened. The other spike extended, and it looks like it's going to extend again. Whatever this is, because it's a no ID, it must be quite close to a species just by looking at the shape of those blooms and the shape of the lip. It's quite close. It could even be a primary cross, I don't know. But it's a mini, and it's pushed out some new roots this year. It hydrates okay. It's got another new root starting now. So it's okay. It takes up no space and no extra care. It just gets watered in with the other mounts. So, and I like the blooms. Right, other mounted ones. This one, these won't have names, but they might have what they are. This one is apparently pale yellow with pink spots and a magenta centre. And we should find out soon, because it's growing a spike. This one again, you know, it's got quite a few root extensions going on. It's produced a spike, and again it's a mini phal, so it lends itself to being mounted. So it's doing okay. Its last leaf was slightly undersized, but not enough to worry about. It's difficult keeping these flipping hydrated back in that heat wave, quite honestly. I was actually throwing them in the Vander bucket, the whole thing, plant and all, and leaving them to soak. Now this little one got thrown out once, and it sat on the dining room table for some time waiting to go under the hedge, because the latest new leaf rotted down into the crown. So I naturally assumed the whole plant would go with it, and it didn't. It didn't get watered for about 3 weeks. And then I thought, well, actually it's on its mount, it has got some roots, it does hydrate. So I'm going to start watering and feeding it and see what it does. And what it will do is one of several things. First thing is it could still die. Second thing is it could actually manage to get a new leaf out. And if it can't get a new leaf out of the crown, it might produce a basal growth. Call it a kiki if you like, but on this type of plant I call them basal growths. So I'm not sure what that one's going to do. And that one is deep purple with pale edges, apparently. I think that bloomed last winter when it was in the house. And the last one is the dinosaur nonsense, and this has nearly been thrown out several times. So this is Zen Min Brontosaurus. And basically it did a funny thing. The centre of the plant stopped growing altogether, and now it's growing what looks like a basal shoot out of the centre of the plant, and it's also pushing another one out of the side. Now there are some species that grow that way, and looking at the blooms on this one, it's quite close to a species despite having a hybrid name. So, and since I've had it, it has always pushed out plants from the side, some of which have been detached. I think one got detached and grew on and got given away to somebody. So at the moment I'm just leaving it be. It is pushing out some roots and doing something which it hasn't done much of for a long time. And it has grown some quite good new roots recently. So I'm just leaving it, you know, water and feed it along with the others. And we'll see what it does. It's on borrowed time, quite honestly, looking at it. But, you know, what it needs to do is push out at least one good-sized leaf from each of those growths. And that will get a bit of strength back into it. But I'm not holding out a lot of hope for that's long-term future. We'll see what it does. So that's my Phalaenopsis. Not many, not my favourite plants. None of them are dying, but I got a feeling that Sedera japonica needs to, in fact I'm going to do it now, that's going out. I'm not prepared to take the risk because that is not natural. That's cell and structural damage that's quite bad right into the plant, and now that I've touched it I've got to go and wash my hands because I'm a little worried about that. And I don't like the plant enough to struggle with it, quite honestly. So I think that one's going to go. Right, and the last question from Joe Kennedy is, how are my Mazda Valleys doing? That's a bit of a hit and miss answer on this. This particular plant looks quite good. It's got quite a few new growths coming on it. Has it got any roots? Yes, but it's in bark and it dries so fast that I have a job to keep up with it. Nonetheless, it's growing and it has got a root system and it's got some new root activity. I'm going to leave that for the winter, but come the spring, providing these new growths are still progressing and some new roots are showing signs of coming on the plant, I'm actually going to get that in something that holds more moisture. That's no ID, just a hybrid. And the thing is, I used to have quite a few Mazda Valley hybrids, and over the years they all keeled over and got thrown out, so I don't know which one I've got. Sorry about that, I just had to stop the camera while I had a sneezing fit. Hopefully it's over. Right, these two at the front are Mazda Valley Snowbird. This was quite a large plant that got left in its pot a bit too long and the roots started to go. The media turned quite acidic. It just seemed to look okay and it just got forgot. And when I did repot it, I had virtually no roots. And quite honestly, I still haven't got any roots. And that's over a year ago now. But the plants haven't died. This one does push up a few new growths now and again. And it loses a leaf now and again. But it's not exactly got a pot full of roots, which after this amount of time it should have. So it's not doing well, but out of the two pieces, that one's not the worst. This one is. This is dropping leaves faster than it's growing new ones. But it is growing some new leaves. Yeah? Did actually throw out a bloom earlier in the year, just the one. But again, got no root growth. Just won't get going. So those two are both the same, Mazda Valley Snowbird. That's the hybrid, we've done that one. This is a new acquisition. Got a nice bud coming, although that looks a little bit desiccated. It might blast, but it's got another one coming as well. And this was a gift from Chris on the trip to Rithlington basically as a thank you for organising the minibus and driving it and everything like that. And it's Mazda Valley Decuman crossed with Vechiana. As soon as I saw Vechiana, I went into panic mode because that's a real cold grower, that one. But this one isn't. I'm reliably told by a good Mazda Valley grower that this one likes a reasonable amount of warmth. Therefore, the combination of the two should get rid of its requirement to be kept really cool. We'll see how it does. But I'm having real trouble keeping this thing hydrated. A lot of the roots are heading towards the edge of this open basket. Well, this is not the sort of plant that should have a lot of aerial roots, really. And although there is a bit of moss in that pot, it's mainly chunky bark. So there's so much air in that pot. Now that came from Rithlington, and that's how they potted it. But then they probably got an army of school children going around watering them every day. Well, I'm not an army of school children. I can't do watering every day. So eventually, I think this is going to have to get potted in something different that holds moisture a little bit better, perhaps. That's that one. And this last one, it's difficult to know whether to include this in the Mazda Valleys or the Draculas, because it's actually a cross between the two, which is unusual. But if you go back far enough, the Draculas were once called Mazda Valleys, and then they got separated out. You have to go back an awful long way. But yeah, so they are very closely related. And this one has been a pain because I've had it some time. It was a gift sent to me, and it's got Vechiana in it again, a very cool grower, crossed with Dracula Hawley. It's yet to bloom, so I haven't got a clue what it's going to look like when it does. I'm just hoping that the Mazda Valley genetic makeup wins the battle and the bloom spikes come out the top of the plant, not burrow down out the bottom like Draculas do, or a lot of them do. But this one is starting to head off out the side of the pot. It does have new growths, but they don't all make it. Some do actually not quite get there. But then it keeps going, it keeps trying to produce more and more, and some of them have actually matured. A lot of these brown ends were there when I got it. They're still there. I could cut them back, but then I've got a wound on the leaf if I cut them. I think I may well trim them and give them a dab of cinnamon just to tidy this up. But it is growing. It doesn't have a mass of roots, but this one's in pure sphagnum moss. And because it hasn't got a massive root system in there, it does actually stay moist a reasonable amount of time before it needs watering again. So yeah, that's the Mazda Valleys. If I do that, like that, there's a space there. Probably have to watch that. See you next time. Thanks for dropping by.